Hi everyone, comic book reviewer here. This time reviewing on Final Fantasy VII Advent Children anime film review. Now, as you know, Final Fantasy VII Advent Children is a 2005 animated science fiction fantasy action adventure film, which of course was meant to be a sort of adaptation of the 1997 role-playing video game Final Fantasy VII and a continuation from Final Fantasy VII. And the best way I can describe Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, it's got a plot, it's got an idea, but it's relying on a rushed, quick, but as well a completely dull and boring story. So the premise of the film is meant to take place sometime after the events of Final Fantasy VII, where we kind of see how after the events of Final Fantasy VII, we see how Cloud is contacted through Tifa to meet with the Shinra company's former president, as well as having to slowly learn about the sort of after effects of Final Fantasy VII, where we see how the physical manifestations of Sephiroth are wreaking havoc, and plans to kind of bring back the sort of main villain after the events of Final Fantasy VII. And I think what I give the film credit is showing how, obviously, after the events of Final Fantasy VII, we see how Cloud has to deal with a lot of things, losing losing everything that he loved and cared about, having to come to terms, and having to deal with more of Sephiroth's actions, and having to kind of try and save everyone, even though he did try to do what he thought was right. And I think what the film is trying to do is show how characters are trying to come to terms with things. Also, characters having to deal with, obviously, dealing with things like, obviously, suffering from diseases, after effects, and so forth. But I think what the film is trying to do is try to throw so much in that it doesn't really know its true identity. And I think what the film suffers from is a bit of a poorly done casting idea. And I think the worst offender is Rachel Leigh Cook for Tifa. And you could definitely get a sense that Rachel Leigh Cook just wasn't interested in playing in a Final Fantasy film. And when she is trying to sound a little concerned, serious, or a little soft-spoken, it feels so enforced. It's the same way looking at George Newbern for playing Sephiroth. He's trying to sound menacing, but it comes off as trying to sound a little too enforced. And I think it's a shame too, like, you get a sense, like, a lot of the cast members just didn't really like doing this film, or there's just some that don't really work, or just don't go together. I give the film credit is trying to show, obviously, Cloud having to deal with a lot of people that he's lost, having to come to terms with things, and being reminded of his past. Like, obviously, being reminded of his friend Zack, and also seeing how, yeah, the woman that he loved, Aerith, is still there in his heart. And it kind of reminds you having to deal with a lot of things that happen to you, having to deal with the terms of things, and trying to kind of figure out where you want to go after losing everything. There is an idea there, but it just feels like it's just obviously having to work on a weak, abysmal, and a wasted potential script. It's okay at best, but it feels like it's one of those films that is trying to force on a different identity. And I think it's a shame too, because I know Final Fantasy VII is like the eye candy of the Final Fantasy fan community. It's usually talked about the same with X or certain Final Fantasy films, that games that obviously a lot of fantasy fans enjoy. It is trying to be something better than Spirits Within, but what it's relying on is a rushed, abysmal, weak, and a wasted potential script. Not the best, not the greatest, but it definitely deserves 2 thumbs downs. Not the best film, not the greatest, but its heart was definitely in the right place. So, Comic Reviewer here, signing out.